I'm delighted to bring him here. Jim is a 25-year veteran of the financial service and information technology industry. He's worked before T. Rowe Price at Capital One Financial, J.P. Morgan Asset Management Division, and Goldman Sachs. He's got an MS from Rensselaer. He's a member of the Investment Company Institute Technology Committee, a board member of Enterprise Engineering, Inc., and a member of Leadership Maryland. Please join me in welcoming Jim Mazarakis, a great UMBC partner in Visionary Technology.
Thank you very much, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for coming and joining us this morning. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I see a lot of folks that I know in the audience, a lot of new folks that I'm happy to meet today. So the conversation, originally when Greg asked me to do this, I said, why me, Greg? You had Carly Fiorina there. Maybe it's time to get Sarah Palin. And I'm happy to fill in, but I don't think, you're aiming really for the same level. And if anybody could actually get some of those big names, there's somebody that works here, Freeman. Freeman could probably get Bill Clinton for free. So that's a big task for most people. So anyhow, the thought that I had today to share with you is to talk a little bit about some of the things that we might consider are likely outcomes and what we might call mega trends that could be part of the world of 2020. Now, 2020 is a dozen years out, and I figured, part of this is that whatever those trends that you may hear about today, how many of you are going to remember 12 years from now if that was right or wrong? But if we talk about these, I think after we have a little bit of discussion, you probably would agree that those may not all be what happens, but many of these are going to be significant in the way that the world is shaped. And for my part, it is the question, what part does IT play to either foster, improve the outcomes that we might see from some of these trends? So that's the discussion today. So now if we look back 12 years and we say, is 12 years enough to make a significant change in something? If you think about 1996, one of the things that has been extremely important and shaped our world today did not exist at that point and was probably not viewed the same way as it is today, which is the internet. And it's only a dozen years for us at T. Rowe Price. It was not until 1998 that we had client access through the internet. And many, many, many other companies the same way. So the momentum that it's taken and the importance and the way that it has shaped how we do business today was really not viewed 12 years ago. So 12 years in terms of technology is a very important time frame. So here are 6 mega trends, and these are not entirely my idea. I must tell you that IBM, in collaboration with economists, has come up with these, and they had done this after interviewing several hundred CEOs around the globe. So here they are. First of all, globalization. And I think few of us would probably argue that globalization is playing a bigger role in what happens today, and we'll talk a little bit in more detail about that. Labor force changes. We have significant shifts that have happened, and even more that are about to happen in the next dozen years or so. Technology and the progress of technology and adoption of technology is changing, and it's becoming faster and faster. Consumer knowledge. What you know about products and services is way, way beyond what you might have had access to a few years ago. So the imbalance between the provider of the service and the seller of the product and the purchaser of that service or product is getting a lot closer. And as a provider has more information than the purchaser, the provider holds greater power. When the purchaser has an equal amount or a very wide amount of information, that imbalance is actually decreased very significantly. Something that many of you may be passionate about, which is the greening, corporate social responsibility. What impact is that going to have in the world? And potentially more regulations and different regulations than we've seen before. And finally, managing unpredictable risks. And all of you have seen the impact that unpredictable risks might have in an economy. If you were to be asked a year ago, what impact might have had on the economy of all the mortgages or the housing boom that we had, it would have been hard for many people to predict. And you saw the impact of having some event like that was very, very significant. So these are the 6. Now, let me ask you out there, is there something else that somebody thinks, because there could be a lot more than these, could be significant as we're looking in the next dozen years? And I'd like to make this a more fluid conversation, so I would welcome questions during the presentation or after. Any thoughts? Yes?
Well, I would have to say that decreasing resources or more competition for resources would have to play into a lot of this.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we're talking about population and also corporate social responsibility, because those two are going to put a huge pressure on resources. So very good point. Yes? Definitely. Regulatory concerns, and some of them will arise because of the impact of some of these things. And it's going to require a lot more regulatory oversight. Yes? Yes?
Just a question. The last bullet, are you saying the trend is that businesses are going to get better at managing these unpredictable risks, or are you saying the trend is that there's going to be more unpredictable risks?
More unpredictable risks, because the growth and some of the things that are resulting from all this growth is going to happen in places that do not have the same amount of transparency as we do here. Yes, I saw a question in the back.
Yeah, the other one that I would think of is just a shifting of political power away from some of the kind of Anglo-Saxon and Western Europe and American down to perhaps Asian and Northern African nations.
Very good point. Yes? Absolutely. Climate changes, and that's why that corporate social responsibility is going to be very, very important. Yes?
Trade balance.
Absolutely. Now, think about this, okay? We're talking about, 12 years from now. If you look at 15 years ago, we were just coming out of a Cold War. And almost all investment was from developed nations into other developed economies. 80% of that flow. 20% was outside of that. Think about what that balance of power and investment is today. Yes, you had a question.
I had raised my hand about suggesting you ask for a trend.
Yes.
In my mind, a major trend is the continuing incorporation of intelligence into technology. So it might fall under increasing speed of technological progress, but I think more specifically that the technology, particularly information technology, will have intelligence. I mean, it's been happening, and it will continue to happen, I think, at an accelerating rate, and what impact it will have on our world by 2020, I think, is one of the more fascinating and hard to predict and potentially powerful influences.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Yes?
You haven't got education up there anyway, but I think education and competitiveness is going to be a real challenge.
Absolutely. As we talk about the labor shifts, that would be a very good one to discuss there. Yes, one more, okay?
Escalating security concerns.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yes, security is going to be an issue, and we'll talk a little bit about security. All right, so let's move on to talk about the first of these, globalization. So some of you may have read Tom Friedman's book, The World is Flat, and we absolutely live in a flatter world these days. So I've put down a number of items that I think globalization affects here, and this is not a holistic list. But as you go down this list, every one of these items, so if you think about healthcare, there is machines now, one of those called the Da Vinci machine, some of you may have heard it, that allows a surgeon in one country to operate on a patient in another country in another operating room. Of course, the entire operation is not done by the machine, but a major part, the most complicated part of the operation is done by the machine. That would have been unthought of a few years ago. As far as healthcare is concerned, you can now have X-ray technicians in India look at your X-ray a few minutes after you have it taken, translate it, tell you what the issue is, and call you right in your home to tell you, what was your result. Typically, if you had had an X-ray, you might have had to wait several days before you could get the results. So now, you would have thought of medicine as one of those areas where it's a one-to-one, it's a face-to-face. But as you disaggregate some of these problems, you can see how you could take a subject like healthcare and really split it up in a lot of different ways. And of course, from the healthcare perspective, medicines. You have found medicines in the United States that have been affected because ingredients came from other countries that were not necessarily put through the same quality controls as we might have here. So globalization affects healthcare. Product liability. You found a number of different manufacturers overseas selling tires here. Those tires were defective. What's the product liability law? The company that was distributing was American, but the company that was making them was Chinese. How can you reach across? There's not an easy way to be able to do that. Agriculture. Ingredients that we have banned in this country can go into products that we purchase from overseas and we consume at the end of the day. Some of the agricultural, like milk and milk products and pet foods that had issues because of ingredient contamination can end up here. And, we saw from the pet food perspective that practically every pet food manufacturer in the U.S. was affected by that. Labor laws. You have American companies that are being looked at because of their labor practices in Asia. And, companies have gotten pretty strong consumer backlash because of some of those practices. Security. Somebody, talked about security earlier. You have Eastern Europeans hacking into the Treasury and other departments that are highly secure. You also have computers from the United States that have been sold to be recycled, and they had their chips removed. Those chips were shipped and sold as new to the United States Defense Department. So you have huge issues because of the cost of different commodities and how different companies are trying to control those costs. Investing, and I have at the end here retirement. So, many of you may not realize that your retirement funds are invested in India or in China or in Singapore or someplace else, but it really has affected everything that we do in ways that were not really easily apparent to us just a few years ago. And the last question here is, what does it mean to be global? And to me, I was at a meeting with an IBM executive, Sam Palmisano, and he's the CEO of the company. And he talked about IBM not being a global company. So as I'm thinking of globalization, I'm saying, how can IBM not be a global company? And that was 2 years ago. And he said, globalization to me is not that you have a branch office in Hamburg. It's not that you have an outpost in China. It is that you use the resources of that country and whatever they're best at. So if you, someplace in Germany, whatever it might be, is got high capability to have R&D and good engineers, you create the R&D center for your company in that country. And that's where you do the R&D for a particular product or service. And if you have an office somewhere in China that may have an expertise in, someone said, artificial intelligence or something else, that becomes part of a global corporation, not a corporation that has outposts all over, but uses the services, the resources that a particular location has in the most opportune way to bring the total benefit to the corporation at a different level. Very different way of thinking of globalization. Now, let's just take a quick look at natural resources. You could see here there's a breakdown of natural resources, and it contains things like fuels, minerals, agricultural products, and it goes back to the 60s and, what does that look like in more recent 2000. The shift is not so dramatic, but there will always be countries that are going to have either the labor pool or the resources or the agricultural products, and those that do not. And there's always going to be a need to take those that are consumers and those that are producers and bring them together somehow. And to me, if you don't have technology, I cannot see how you can possibly put those two together. It's only through technology that you can exchange and be able to bring the consumption part and the producing part more in line. Now, some of you may argue there's other ways to do this, but to me, for some of these products, technology is really the way to do it. So, does technology have an impact on globalization? And you may have difficulty reading this, so I'm going to try to read this to you. This was from an excerpt. It was actually a Canadian journal that says technology and globalization go hand in hand. Globalization unleashes technology, which in turn drives firms to plan production and sales on a global basis. And we talked a little bit about that with IBM. Technology changes the work that we do, and in nearly all cases, the jobs created by it demand more education. Somebody said education earlier, and training. It also changes the way businesses operate by transforming relationships between suppliers, producers, retailers, and customers. Very true statement, and this was written more than 5 years ago. There is expectation now that the top 10 jobs demanded, in terms of demand, of 2010 did not exist in 2004. Think about that. In 6 years, the top 10 jobs in 2010 did not exist in 2004. So I sympathize with the challenge that the university has in training students today for jobs that may not even exist today. And if you were to think about it, one of the areas that's very high in potential demand and growth in the future is nanotechnology, right? Nanotechnology, we probably are in, the first inning of what's possible. And some of you here, because there's a lot of educators, may have read the book Nano Future that talks about how nanotechnology can really impact the world. And the thing that was most amazing to me is to read that a jet engine, a 100,000 horsepower jet engine, within a few years, through nanotechnology, could be held at the palm of your hand. Now, it does not mean that it would be great for the planes, because the planes could be a lot smaller. But you know what? If you take 1/100th of that and stick it on a backpack behind you and put a suit on, you can fly yourself to another city. I mean, so what's possible and what could happen is mind-boggling. Now, and on another side of that, there is going to be some technical challenges to make that happen, because at the atomic level, the properties of materials change. So steel is going to be like Play-Doh. So you're going to need to make these machines out of diamonds or other very, very hard materials that maybe they have not even been founded yet. But these machines are so small, and the author, Dr. Hall, wrote that you can even put a small antenna on these machines that could either reflect or absorb light to make them totally invisible. So not only are they going to be small, you might not even be able to see them. So amazing things that could be coming down that, those companies that are going to be selling those products and services are not around today. Maybe they are. But if you think back a dozen years ago, where was Amazon.com? Where was eBay? Where was Yahoo? Where was Google? Those companies did not exist. So very exciting. So let's look at the next trend. Ever-changing labor force. So here is a little schematic that goes to right after the war, World War II, 1950, and you can see the blue line at the very bottom. It's not really blue in yours, maybe dark blue. Those are the more developed countries, and the orange is the less developed part of the world. And that's what the population looked in 1950. A little bit more than 3 billion people. What does it look like 100 years from 1950? That's 2050. That's an estimation. So what you're looking at is in 100 years, we tripled the global population. Tripled in 100 years. The prior 3,000 years of civilization did not see anywhere near this growth. Will this happen? I mean, I don't know, but we talked about corporate social responsibility. When you look at that chart, how can we afford not to be green? Where are going to be the resources that are going to feed all these people? And how long can it continue for? It is not sustainable. You know, the planet is finite. The growth at this rate, it's pretty infinite. So big challenges from that. And you know, when I was doing a little study with my 13-year-old, and he was studying biomes, and he was learning about rabbits, it says that the population of the rabbits can continue to grow to a very high extent, but then they run out of water, they run out of food, and it starts to drop down to be what's sustainable for that particular area, given all their natural predators. So I don't know if we're going to reach that level, but that is, to me, a pretty scary way to look at the future from a population point of view. So here are some statistics. In 20 years, between the year 2000 to 2020, world population growth of 1.8 billion. 1.8 billion in 20 years. 96% of that in developing countries. 2008, well, that's not so significant, and more people live in cities than not. But natural English speakers, only 5% of the global. You know, one other thing that is interesting, now, not necessarily a natural English speaking country, but what do you predict will be the largest English-speaking country in the world within a few years? China. Whoever said that, that's correct. So another way to look at it, if you take the 25% of, let's say that in a normal population of students or people, a quarter of them will have the highest IQ, so these would be the most intelligent people in that population. If you look at it that way, and if you take the brightest people in India, the 1/4 that is the brightest people in India, they exceed our entire population. So India has more honor students than we have students. So what do we do about education? You know, how can we improve that? Is our education system able to provide and bridge that gap? It's a very hard thing to do. Here's another example. Well, you know, we didn't talk about all the stuff that was on the previous page, but, you know, what was interesting, as we're talking about the labor force growth of 200 to 300 million in that same 20-year period that we talked about before. And more than 100% of that growth is coming from less developed countries. Why? Because US labor growth in that period would be about 20 million, but from Europe and Russia, it would be a net deficit of 40. So if you take all the developed countries together, actually they would lose 20 million in labor force. And if you put all the developing countries together, they will supply the other 200 to 300 million worth of labor in the future. So from a technology perspective, you know, technology can help bridge that space again, where workers are and where work needs to be done. Can't see any other way to do it other than technology unless everybody moves around. And I don't think that that is going to be an easy thing to do. So here's another example, and this was an article that was in November 10 Wall Street Journal, and it shows the world population for petroleum engineers. So in 2008, about 80,000 petroleum engineers globally. And you can see what's happening over a short period of time, since 1997 to 2007, in that 10-year period. Guess where all the 50 and years older engineers are? Most of them are in the developed world. Where are the new engineers coming from? From the developing world. And the gap in the middle, the folks that perhaps have enough experience and capability is shrinking over time. Now, why is energy important? Energy is important because as you see the population numbers, energy is going to be one of the biggest challenges that we're going to have. And we as a country have a huge dependence on energy. Now, what's the amount of time that it takes us to provide and build a nuclear plant? It's at least 20 years. So from the time that you think that you're going to need to provide a new nuclear plant, the time that it takes to get all the approvals necessary to get the nuclear plant started, and the time that you deliver it, it's 20 years. That's a long time. Now, how many universities do we have in the United States that are private universities that have a nuclear program? 2. RPI and MIT. That's it. And we have maybe another 20 that are public. Huge deficit. How many did we have a few years ago? If you go back 25 years, we had a lot more nuclear colleges and nuclear programs available. So the way to bridge that gap is not easy, because to create those programs, to have that training, to have that impact, to build those plants is going to take a long time. So that's a challenge with energy, and that's a challenge with education and training and how we look at that as we're looking at the future. So labor force is going to be definitely, in my estimation, a challenge. Now let's look at the next trend. Increasing speed of technology progress. And here, this is also an excerpt from the IBM Business Value Analysis that shows what amount of time does it take to have 50 million users of a particular technology. And of course, as you saw the population graph, you can understand why some of the earlier ones have taken longer. So in the 1980s, railway took 80 years. 90s, radio, that was 38 years, and you see everything is progressing down. Skype took less than a year to get 50 million users. And you probably have some other examples. iPod, 3 years. Facebook had 50 million users in 2 years. Now, why is 50 million important? I mean, 50 million is not, it's somewhat of a nebulous number, but 50 million is important in one way, that for a technology to have impact, to have enough investment put in it, and to have value, you have to have a significant number of users. If you only had 10,000 users of the internet would have not had any value. Now you have 1 billion people online. That's a huge number. And what are they doing all day long? They're creating content. They're putting up their pictures, their videos, their blogs. They're collaborating with each other. They're writing something. So that's a huge amount of content. You cannot have that rich of an experience or that amount of information if you have a very small user base for a particular technology. So that's part of the reason that 50 million, I think, is important. So this, how did all this advance in technology take place? Part of it is you can see very rapid price reductions. And if you look in the case of the cell phone, and you go back, what would it cost 20 years ago to buy a cell phone? You see the price was over $4,000. Now you could buy a cell phone. First of all, you could get it for nothing. But let's assume that you bought a cell phone for 1/100th of that. Or, let's say you bought it for $40. That $40 cell phone is going to have capability that the $4,000 cell phone never had. You'll be able to put your music on it. You'll be able to take pictures with it. You'll be able to access the internet with it. You'll be able to IM. You'll be able to do so many things, check maps, find your way to get someplace that were never, ever available for you before. And the cost of the device is minuscule. The price of a megabyte, you could see there, this was in 1998, it was $58 a megabyte. It's now 3/100ths of a penny. That's what makes a difference in adoption, because the price is much more affordable, the capabilities are much richer. It allows people to be able to purchase these things even when they're not making a lot of money, because some of these devices can really have an impact on their life. And the laptop example, back in 1988, I don't know that you could call what we had a laptop. If you put it on your lap, you'd probably be suffering, you know, so it's hard to see it if you go back even a short period of time. Now, are the tech companies going bankrupt because of the price reduction? Well, what has happened at the same time, the usage has skyrocketed. Now, look, from 2000 to 2008, the number of text messages being sent went from 150 million to 1,500 billion. That's in 8 years. Today, we're sending more text messages every day than the entire population of the globe. So the usage has skyrocketed to such a high extent. And what does that cause? That causes a much different level of collaboration and information sharing than ever before, because that's part of the solution with technology, information and information sharing. Information can solve a lot of the issues that we have. And it's that information being available when you need it and being very exact to the kind of question that you need to solve. Some of the statistics that I had seen was that the number of Google searches just a few years ago versus, I think in 2004, versus now, it went from 2.7 billion searches a month to 37 billion searches a month. And the question was, who was answering all those questions before? You know, if you think about it in those terms, and now you've heard Google wants to create an epidemiology map of the United States to see where influenza is traveling by the kind of questions people are asking, so that they would be able to show, you know, where is parts of an influenza more likely to be at any time. Now think about that, and how many other questions could you ask and potentially solve by understanding why people are asking a certain question at different times? It's very, very important to think about that, because I think it could make a difference and probably be predictive more than reactive. So, increasing speed of technological progress. You know, one more set of content here. I hope I'm not running too late here. I'm going to try to speed it up a little bit. I'm sorry. So the increasing level of innovation and improvement in this price performance information that we saw before have resulted in a huge increase in adoption of usage. And here's some estimates. UN. UN estimates global number of cell phone subscribers, 4 billion by the end of this year. China having 547 billion cell subscribers in 2007, and 86 million new subscribers in 1 year. 86 million new subscribers. India, between 2004 to 2008, in that 4-year span, went from 34 million subscribers to 246 million subscribers. Now, again, that is important because it means information dissemination. A person who's a farmer can find out the price of the goods and services that they're selling before they have to transport them to market. They might wait because too many other sellers may be there that particular day. So the amount of information is not just because you can use a cell phone and talk to a buddy of yours. That's terrific. But you can find out information that you never had access to before. You can find out what the weather is going to be. So you may harvest something before that you would ordinarily harvest. You may go out to sea today because tomorrow may be too choppy. So with that cell phone, you can find out a lot of information that was never available to you before. You can do business in a fundamentally different way. So let's move on. Widening consumer knowledge. Now, you could find things out today that was previously unavailable. So for example, if you were going to buy a car, you know, a dozen years ago, maybe you would buy the Consumer Reports guide and you would see what different cars were selling for with different options. All that information and so much more is available to you online at any given time, whenever you want it. So information on price, on product features, the availability. How did you know if a particular store had something? You know, you never even have to go to the store anymore. You can buy it online if you wanted to. Hidden warranties. And also, more importantly, you can find out information from other users of that exact same product. What was their experience like? So none of these things were really available to you a dozen years ago. And here's an example of TripAdvisor. You know, you're planning to go to a hotel, stay in another city. You can find right away, is that a good hotel? Does it have good amenities? Is the service good? And you can find it out from people that have had that service and were staying in that particular facility before you. Never was this information available before. Same thing with, orbits. Can you imagine a dozen years ago for you to be able to tell if you're going someplace at a particular date, who had available seats, and how much it would cost you to get there, and compare with everybody else that was doing the same thing? You didn't have that. So the amount of information available to consumers and the bridging of that gap between what a producer of a service or a product and the consumer of that product or service is gotten so much closer that the advantage goes back to the consumer. All right, let's talk about corporate social responsibility. Which of these products do you think has the best carbon footprint? This, by the way, was an article in the Wall Street Journal. This was 10/6, so it was a little bit more than a month ago. Any guesses? Jacket, okay. Beer. Yeah, some of you read the article. Beer, absolutely. Now, next was milk. Sorry?
Does that take into account the amount of water is required to manufacture beer?
Everything is, I will show you that in just a minute, and there will be some surprises as you see those numbers. And let me put them all up there so you could see. If you had not guessed that the car was the highest, I think it would have been a challenge for us, but some surprises, and I think what's even more surprising in some ways, as you look at the actual carbon footprint of each one of these. Let's go to the, okay, here's the beer. The interesting thing to me about the beer is that if you look at the total consumption of carbon, 36% of the total consumption is for cooling, either cooling in the store or in your house before you consume the product. 36%, so more than a third. And 8% is in shipping, so significant amount. Now, also the other part is that the CO2 that's added to do the the fizziness in it, that adds 2.3%. The interesting thing about the milk is what kills the milk from a carbon footprint perspective is the cow, really, because 28% of the carbon footprint is the cow's digestive system. So produce a lot of carbon. I didn't know that. I don't know if others out there knew that, a little fact. And another thing that makes a big difference is what is the milk transported in? So if you're transporting the milk in cartons, in cases that are made out of paper, versus if you're transporting it in cases that are made out of plastic, it can go from 6.2 to 7.6, the carbon footprint change. So it changes by 1.5 additional pounds, depending on how you're shipping it. I'm not going to really spend a lot of time here, but the laundry detergent, you can see the majority of that is really consumed by the washing machine. And the fleece jacket, 70% in the production of the polyester. What was interesting, when these companies actually computed the carbon footprint, they found a lot of information that they never really had considered, because a lot of them thought that the shipping of the products and services would have had a significant impact, and it did not have as significant as you could see some of the other things here. But the Patagonia found out that the fabric was made in China for this jacket. The zippers came from Japan, and it was sewn together in Vietnam. Yet all the transportation needed to make all that transfer happen was less than 1% of the carbon footprint. So you would think that it would be grossly inefficient to have products made in all these different countries brought together and then shipped to the final consumer. Here with the boots, the amount of leather consumed was the primary one, and I'm not really going to go and spend too much time. On the Toyota, the important thing to note is the half of the consumption was the fuel. But look at the amount of consumption producing the fuel and transporting it, bringing the fuel to your gas station. Think of how much more efficient it is if you had a car that you could actually plug in at home. The fuel would never have to be transported. Let's go to the last part about corporate social responsibility. So what can IT do to improve the carbon footprint, the greening of the planet? IT as a user of technology and power is 2% of the global carbon footprint. So 2% of the global footprint, if we make everything in IT more efficient, maybe it can be 1% of the global footprint. And things are becoming more efficient, and they use less energy, and they shut down sooner, and so forth. Could that be significant? Yeah, that could be significant. The 2% that we talked about is also significant if you think about it, that the airline industry is also 2% of the total carbon footprint. But what IT can do to really reduce the impact is to work on the other 98%. If IT can work on the other 98% of the carbon footprint, it would have much more significant impact. And what are some of those things? You probably have used them or known, telecommuting. If people were able to do their jobs through technology from home, and there's many jobs that can be done from home today, but it's the acceptance, the social acceptance that those are, that's a valid way of working that is more of a challenge, and the ability to do the job in a way that does not consume transportation time to and from. Other things, almost being there, teleconferencing, so much more advanced, better way to teleconference. Logistics. Here's an example that was in Business Week that I found very, very interesting. During the Chinese Olympics, China was thinking that as part of the Olympics, they had venues that were all over the city, and people needed to get from place A to place B in a short period of time. It's a very large city, has a lot of congestion, and all that traffic was also going to generate more smog, which they didn't want to. So what they ended up doing is they have a taxi fleet of about 22,000 cabs. They outfitted all of those cabs with GPSs. Great. So you can find out how to go from place A to place B, most efficient way. But they did another thing. Through cellular connections, they were able to transmit back to a mainframe computer the location of all those and the average speed all those cabs were traveling. By having that real-time information, they were able to reroute other taxis and other fares from locations that had high traffic and congestion to other parts. So through logistics, what they were able to accomplish, they shortened travel time by 16%, and they shortened consumption of gasoline by 24%. And they were able to achieve that even if only 1/3 of those cabs were operational at any one time. So we have collaboration among people. If we have collaboration among machines, we can even improve that better. And of course, collaboration for people is another area that, of course, can help. There's no need for everybody to be in the same room. If we can collaborate the idea and if we can improve on it, we can do it remotely. We don't have to be together. Improved electronic archiving. If everything that you needed access to was stored in a place and in a secure place that you could immediately get access to, why would you ever save a piece of paper? Why would you ever print something? So if I knew that I could find a statement or a piece of communication or something, and it was easy for me to retrieve it, I wouldn't ever need to store it. And of course, electronic delivery. And for our business, if we had more electronic delivery of information, statements, content, that would be a very significant way to reduce cost and also to reduce carbon footprint. Let's talk about the last one and leave a little bit of time for questions. There's probably not much time. So what I'll do for these unpredictable risks, I'm just going to put them up here and let everybody take a quick look at them. So why is this whole idea of unpredictable risks important? It is important because as we saw through the growth and through some of the trends just before, a lot of this growth and through globalization is going to happen in economies that are going to be much less developed. The financial systems of those countries are more unpredictable. We as a company are transacting in companies today that we had not bought securities from more than 2 years ago. And their economies are not as transparent as ours. Their speech is not free. There is a different way of doing business, and the expectation of patents and patent laws and how things are upheld is very, very different. So all that unpredictability and all those risks are going to come from places that we don't have a lot of familiarity with today. And where can information technology make a difference? First part of information technology is information. People who have access to information can better predict, better understand what the risks are that they may be entering into. So that concludes my conversation. So I'm going to open it up to questions. I see that I have one already. Yes.
First, a comment and a question. Besides RPI being famous for the nuclear program, they also have the only rocket scientist that was on Survivor, who happens to be from Maryland.
Hey to that.
And he's at MIT right now getting a MBA and advanced degree in chemistry. But my question to you is about your organization. With the economic situation today, what kind of constraints or new requirements do you currently have? And are you looking for more efficient technologies? Can you comment on that?
Sure. Times like this bring out efficiencies. And absolutely, one of the things that we just completed, and that happened a week ago, is we created a collaboration forum for all of our IT associates in the company. And we asked a question, and we put it on a collaboration tool, and we asked all associates to give us ideas. And they were able to give us ideas on how we can become more efficient ourselves as a division and as a company. And then the collaboration tool allowed each person to rate somebody else's idea from 1 to 5 stars, and then it created a pyramid of all the outcomes, of which ones were the ideas that most people thought we should go after first, second, third, fourth, and now we're starting the task of looking at those. So absolutely, in times like this, it's very important for us to look at efficient ways of doing things. Thank you. Yes?
Along the same line, how much of what you're presenting here impacts on your professional life? Do you provide this as input to the corporate level for decision-making in terms of investments, or is this more a sidelight to what you're doing?
It's a sidelight to what I'm doing, but we've also brought folks in, believe it or not, folks that are running large companies that are IT-specific. Because they are going through so many different industries, they have perspectives, and the IBM Institute for Economic Value that had some of this research, we brought some of those folks into T. Rowe Price to talk to some of our senior executives. So they do have a perspective, and it's not a perspective only from a corporate point of view, but it's learned through research that they have from dozens and dozens of other CEOs and CIOs. So we do share some of that information as well. Thank you. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Yes?
The explosion of channels and fragmentation of media that people will have access to gain information. How important is it, or is your IT group able to measure your relationship of where people are receiving that information relative to when they make a decision to invest or to shift funds? Are you able to track that along measure?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Business intelligence is a whole another area of IT that folks are looking at. And there are some very advanced tools for business intelligence. One of the tools that we do, and I don't want to use names of products, is looking at the web access that we have from our clients. And it gives us detail that is phenomenal. Where are they coming from? What site did they come from? What geographic part are they coming? What speed are they connected with? What part of our client strata are they? When did they call? How often did they call? The amount of information that comes from that is very, very significant. So through business intelligence, in many corporations, and one of my prior employers, Capital One, was doing that to a very, very high extent, having predictive analysis, saying if event A happens followed by event B, that's predictive that event C will happen. And event C may be that the customer may attrite, or event C might be that the customer may make a larger investment in one of your funds. And depending on what event C is, you may want to prevent it, or you may want to expedite it and help it. So definitely, business intelligence is an area that is very fast growing right now. Has many different channels available. It's not only the web channel. There are companies that allow you to take all your phone interactions where your clients call in and digitize all that information. Through heuristics, you can tell if the client at the end of the conversation was more or less satisfied than when they started. You don't even have to listen to the conversation. And then it has a predictive ability to say, okay, if the client was dissatisfied, what would happen next? Or if the client is satisfied, what will happen next? So, definitely business intelligence, we have not seen the beginning of what it could do right now, but it's a huge amount in the future. Any other questions? Yes?
I'm a professor of information systems, and we try to give the students challenging questions about information systems, and we think about, say, for instance, the current financial crisis. And I was wondering what you thought, and the context was just try to pose to the student, what was the role of information systems in causing this financial crisis? What might be the role of information systems in solving the financial crisis? Did you have any comments on that?
My wife asks me that question every day because she's saying, why are you still in the market? I would say that in some ways, the best tool that most of our companies have in preventing risks, because I think that's what you're asking really, how do we prevent a disaster from happening, is to have the right people. And machines are very intelligent. Now, the prediction is that by 2013, there will be a computer that will be faster in processing and more able to process than the human mind. By 2046, the prediction is a $1,000 computer will be able to surpass all brains of the entire human race. So 2013 for one, and 2046 for all, whatever that number is, in that 10 billion chart that we saw before. But I don't think that we are able to, I think we get into trouble sometimes in our business if we think that we can simulate a particular condition and then expect those conditions to hold at the extreme. And they do not hold at the extreme. Some of those predictions are very, very good in the 80% range, but once you go outside of that, the way the market would respond, the way that the particular security would respond is very difficult to predict. Now, you might have luck for many, many years and do very well, but you probably are familiar with the black swan theory. If the black swan theory, which is true, can happen in a particular security, you can make a ton of money when you're, going out to the outer edges that don't happen very often. But for a long time, you may be investing in that, particular security and nothing, may come of it. So I don't think that we're at the point that we can do artificial intelligence in the financial services market in a very exact way. And maybe somebody else is, that's a personal opinion. That's not a T. Rowe Price opinion. And everything I said today is a personal opinion, okay?
Folks, Jim Mazarakis, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.